You let me be angry, sad, confused, even happy sometimes. You let me be complicated. Welcome to Internal Love Diaries, where real stories change real lives. Every love carries a story. And here, each one is told from the heart. Today's story follows Daniel, a 41-year-old architect who spent 3 years hiding behind his work, avoiding connection after a devastating divorce left him unable to trust. When his neighbor Katherine loses her husband suddenly, Daniel finds himself drawn into her grief in ways he never anticipated. A single question asked on the darkest night of her life will force both of them to confront what they've been running from. What begins as an act of compassion becomes something neither can control, testing the boundaries between friendship and something deeper, between duty and desire, between the safety of isolation and the terrifying beauty of letting someone in again. This is a story about finding light in the darkest places and discovering that sometimes the person who saves you is the one you thought you were saving. Daniel stood at his kitchen window at 2 a.m, watching the last car pull away from Katherine's house. The funeral had been that morning. He'd attended, standing in the back, offering his condolences like everyone else in their quiet Colorado neighborhood. But now, hours later, all the well-meaning friends and family had returned to their own lives, and Katherine's house sat dark except for a single light in her living room. He knew that light. He'd seen it burning every night for the past week since Robert died. Sleep wasn't coming for her, and Daniel understood that particular hell better than most. His phone buzzed. The message was simple, just 5 words that would change everything. "Will you stay with me tonight?" Daniel stared at the screen, his heart pounding. This wasn't appropriate. They were neighbors, barely friends really, just people who waved across driveways and made small talk about weather and property taxes. He was divorced, damaged, and she'd buried her husband 8 hours ago. Every rational thought told him to decline politely, to suggest she call a family member instead. But rational thoughts didn't account for the raw vulnerability in those 5 words. They didn't account for the fact that he recognized the desperate loneliness behind them because he'd lived it himself. Daniel grabbed his jacket and walked across the yard that separated their homes, each step feeling like crossing an invisible line he couldn't uncross. Katherine opened the door before he could knock, her eyes red but dry, as if she'd cried herself empty. She was 38, a pediatric nurse with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing the same black dress from the funeral. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, stepping aside to let him enter. The house still smelled like the casserole dishes and flower arrangements that crowded every surface. Daniel had met Robert twice, maybe 3 times in the 2 years since moving in next door. A good man from what he could tell, younger than Katherine by a year, a high school teacher who'd collapsed from an undiagnosed heart condition while grading papers. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. Katherine led him to the living room where she'd clearly been sitting alone, a photo album open on the coffee table, a cold cup of tea beside it. "I don't know why I asked you to come," she said, her voice stronger now. "Everyone keeps saying I shouldn't be alone, but when my sister offered to stay, I couldn't bear it. She means well, but she wants me to talk about him, to cry, to process." She sat down heavily on the couch. "You're the only person I know who won't expect anything from me." Daniel understood immediately. After his divorce, after his ex-wife had shattered their 12-year marriage with betrayal and lies, everyone had wanted him to share, to heal, to move forward. Sometimes you just needed someone to sit in the darkness with you without trying to turn on the lights. He sat in the chair across from her, maintaining that respectful distance. "I won't ask you anything you don't want to answer," he said quietly. "And I won't tell you how you should feel." They sat in silence for nearly 20 minutes. Not awkward silence, but the kind that exists between people who understand that words aren't always necessary. Katherine finally spoke, her gaze fixed on the photo album. "We were going to renew our vows next month. 15 years. Her laugh was bitter and broken. "I'd already bought a new dress. Isn't that stupid? I'm sitting here thinking about a dress I'll never wear for a ceremony that will never happen." "It's not stupid," Daniel said. "After my divorce, I kept my wedding ring in my desk drawer for a year. I take it out sometimes, just to remember that I hadn't imagined those 12 years. He hadn't told anyone that before. The admission surprised him as much as it seemed to comfort her. Katherine looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw recognition there. She'd seen him coming home late every night, eating dinner alone on his porch, maintaining his yard with mechanical precision, going through the motions of life without really living it. "Why did you get divorced?" she asked. Then immediately shook her head. "I'm sorry, that's too personal." "She fell in love with someone else," Daniel said simply. "My best friend from college, actually. They tried to hide it for months before I found out. The betrayal wasn't just losing her, it was losing my ability to trust my own judgment." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I thought I knew her completely. I thought I knew him. Turns out I didn't know either of them at all." Katherine nodded slowly. "Robert and I never had that kind of passion," she admitted. "We were best friends who got married because it made sense. We loved each other, but it was comfortable, safe." Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "And now I feel guilty because I keep wondering if he knew. If he felt like he was second choice when he was actually the best choice I ever made. I just didn't realize it until it was too late to tell him." The rawness of her confession broke something open in Daniel. He moved to the couch, sitting beside her but not touching, giving her space to fall apart without falling alone. Katherine cried then, deep wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Daniel didn't try to comfort her with empty platitudes. He just stayed, present and steady, until the storm passed and she was left exhausted and hollow. "I'm terrified of the morning," Katherine whispered. "When I wake up and remember all over again that he's gone. That this is my life now." She turned to Daniel, her face vulnerable and open. "How do you do it? How do you wake up every day and just keep going when everything you planned is gone?" Daniel considered lying, offering some inspirational wisdom about strength and resilience. But Katherine deserved honesty. "Most days I don't know," he admitted. "I work 70 hours a week designing buildings I don't care about. I come home to an empty house, and I tell myself I'm fine with it. That being alone is safer than risking that kind of pain again." He met her eyes. "But I'm not fine with it. I'm just surviving, not living. There's a difference." "I don't want to just survive," Katherine said fiercely. "Robert wouldn't want that for me. But I don't know how to do anything else right now." She laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "Listen to us, two broken people sitting in the dark talking about how lost we are. This is pathetic." "This is human," Daniel corrected gently. "And maybe we're supposed to be lost sometimes. Maybe that's how we find different paths." He glanced at the photo album, at the smiling faces frozen in happier times. "You loved him. That's not something to feel guilty about, even if it wasn't perfect. Perfect doesn't exist." They talked until dawn began painting the sky pink and gold outside the windows. Katherine shared stories about Robert, about their quiet life together, about dreams they'd never fulfill. Daniel talked about his marriage, about the warning signs he'd ignored, about rebuilding a life from scratch at 38. Somewhere in those hours, something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but understanding. Recognition. Two people who'd been drowning separately finding someone who understood the weight of the water. When morning finally arrived, Katherine made coffee while Daniel called his office to cancel his meetings. She protested weakly, but he could see the relief in her eyes at not facing the day alone. They sat at her kitchen table, exhausted but no longer quite so lost. "I need to ask you something," Katherine said, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. "And I need you to be completely honest with me." Daniel nodded, waiting. Katherine took a deep breath. "Last night, when I texted you, part of me was hoping for something more than just company. Not physically," she added quickly, color rising in her cheeks. "But emotionally. Connection. Something to make me feel less alone." She looked at him directly. "Did you feel it too?" Or am I projecting my grief onto the first person who showed me genuine kindness? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Daniel could lie, could protect them both from complications, could walk away and return to his safe, lonely existence. But Katherine had been brave enough to ask, and she deserved equal bravery in return. I felt it, he admitted quietly. I've been feeling it for months, actually. Every time I saw you in your yard, every time we talked across the fence. But you were married and I was broken, so I ignored it. And now? Katherine's voice was barely a whisper. Now everything is complicated, Daniel said honestly. You just lost your husband. You're grieving. This isn't the time for either of us to make decisions about what this is or could be. He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. But I'm not going anywhere. When you're ready, if you're ready, we can figure this out together. And if you're never ready, I'll still be here as your friend. No pressure, no expectations. Katherine stared at his hand, so close to hers, separated by inches that felt like miles. Then she closed the distance, her fingers intertwining with his. I can't promise you anything, she said. I don't know who I am without Robert yet. I don't know what I want or need. Then we start there, Daniel said. We figure out who we are separately before we try to be anything together. It was the most rational, sensible approach. It was also the hardest thing he'd ever committed to, because every instinct screamed at him to pull her close and promise her everything would be okay. The weeks that followed tested them both. Daniel came over most evenings, helping Katherine sort through Robert's belongings, listening when she needed to talk, sitting in comfortable silence when words were too hard. He met her sister and parents, navigating the awkwardness of being the divorced neighbor who seemed to be around constantly. Some of Katherine's friends whispered, their judgment obvious. It was too soon, they said. Inappropriate. Daniel heard the rumors through mutual acquaintances and offered to step back, but Katherine refused. You're the only thing keeping me sane, she told him one evening as they packed Robert's clothes for donation. Everyone else wants me to be the grieving widow they expect. You let me be angry, sad, confused, even happy sometimes. You let me be complicated. She held up one of Robert's teaching award plaques. Is it wrong that I'm starting to feel okay? That whole hours go by where I don't think about him? It's called healing, Daniel said. And it doesn't mean you loved him any less. Katherine set down the plaque and turned to face him fully. 3 months had passed since the funeral. Her eyes were clearer now, the constant shadow of grief beginning to lift. I need to tell you something, and it's going to sound terrible. She took a breath. I think I was lonely in my marriage long before Robert died. I think we both were, but we were too comfortable to admit it or do anything about it. Daniel had suspected as much from things she'd said, but hearing her acknowledge it was different. What made you realize that? These past months with you, Katherine admitted. The conversations we have, the way you actually listen and challenge me and make me think. Robert and I stopped really talking years ago. We coexisted peacefully, but we didn't connect anymore. She stepped closer to Daniel, her expression serious. And that makes me feel like the worst person alive because he's gone and I can't fix it or tell him I'm sorry. You can still tell him, Daniel said gently. Forgiveness doesn't require the other person to be present. Sometimes we forgive ourselves on their behalf because we know they would if they could. He spoke from experience. He'd spent months angry at his ex-wife before realizing that forgiveness was for him, not her. It freed him from carrying that weight. Katherine nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. I forgive myself for not being perfect, she whispered. And I forgive Robert for not being perfect either. We did our best with what we knew. She wiped her eyes and looked at Daniel with something new in her expression. Hope. And I think I'm ready to try again. Not to replace what I lost, but to build something new. Are you sure? Daniel asked, his heart racing. Because I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere. You can take all the time you need. I've taken enough time, Katherine said firmly. I know what I want now. I want someone who sees me completely, flaws and complications and all. I want conversations that matter and silences that don't feel empty. I want to live, not just survive. She reached for his hand. I want you, Daniel. If you still want me. Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her close for the first time. I want you, he said against her hair. I want us. I want whatever we can build together. They stood like that for a long moment, two broken people choosing to be whole together rather than fractured apart. Their relationship didn't follow a traditional path. They took it slowly, learning each other gradually, building trust through honesty and patience. Katherine introduced Daniel to her daughter from her first marriage, a college student who'd been studying abroad during Robert's death. Daniel brought Katherine to his firm's holiday party, officially claiming his life back from the shadows he'd been hiding in. They faced judgment from some quarters, people who thought it was too soon or somehow disrespectful to Robert's memory. But Katherine had learned something crucial through her grief. Life was too short and too precious to waste on other people's expectations. She'd lost years being who everyone else thought she should be. Now she was choosing herself, choosing happiness, choosing Daniel. And Daniel was choosing her right back, every single day. A year after that first night when she'd asked him to stay, they stood in Katherine's backyard at sunset. The house was sold, the memories carefully packed away or donated. Tomorrow they'd move into a new place together, a fresh start for both of them. Do you think Robert would approve? Katherine asked, leaning against Daniel as they watched the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. I think Robert would want you to be happy, Daniel said. And I think he'd appreciate that you found someone who treasures you the way you deserved all along. He turned her to face him. I know I'm grateful to him for leading me to you, even if the path was painful for both of us. Katherine smiled, the first completely unburdened smile Daniel had seen from her. I used to think second chances were just settling for less than what you really wanted, she said. But I was wrong. Sometimes second chances are about getting what you actually needed all along, you just didn't know it yet. They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon, two people who'd found each other in the darkness and chose to walk toward the light together. It wasn't the fairy tale either of them had imagined when they were younger. It was better because it was real, built on honesty and choice and the courage to be vulnerable again. The lesson neither of them expected to learn was that sometimes the worst moments of our lives prepare us for the best ones. Grief taught Katherine to value genuine connection over comfortable routine. Betrayal taught Daniel to recognize authentic love when he found it. And asking for help on the darkest night led them both to discover that healing doesn't mean forgetting the past, it means being brave enough to build a future anyway. We'd love to know, which country are you watching from? Drop a comment below. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe in second chances, show your support by hitting the like button. Subscribe to Internal Love Diaries for more stories that touch the heart and change perspectives. Remember, it's never too late to start again, to open your heart, or to find love in the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person you're meant to be with is waiting right next door, and all it takes is the courage to ask them to stay. Thank you for being part of our community where every story reminds us that love, in all its forms, is worth the risk. From Boulder, Colorado, United States.